Hey there YouTube, Contrarian dude here, and this is going to be one of my most favorite videos in a long time. I'm going to be talking about another video on YouTube. I don't know what to call this, there's so many good names to call it. The Cult of Indiscriminateness was what I think what I'm going to go with. Maybe SJWs explain why they hate everyone, and where does their ideology come from. Black Lives Matter, social justice warriors, leftists, the anti-Trump movement, they all hold one core belief. And from that cascades a whole bunch of erroneous and bad decisions. And so this was all explained to me in this video, which is the link in the description. I highly recommend you check it out. I'm going to show a few clips from it right now as well so you can get the gist of it. But it basically explains that all of these groups of people, what was the core belief that made them leave the reservation? And the speech is by a gentleman named Evan Sayet. It was under the Heritage Foundation about 8 years ago. I just came across it a couple of weeks ago, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. Here's a couple of clips, and then I'll come back at the end and apply it to some more modern issues like the social justice warrior movement. See you soon.
They're indoctrinated into what I call a cult of indiscriminateness. And the way the elite does this is by teaching our children, starting with the very young, that rational and moral thought is an act of bigotry. That no matter how sincerely you may seek to gather the facts, no matter how earnestly you may look at the evidence, no matter how disciplined you may try to be in your reasoning, your conclusion is going to be so tainted by your personal bigotries, by your upbringing, by your religion, by the color of your skin, by the nation of your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather's birth, that no matter what your conclusion, it is useless. It is nothing other than a reflection of your bigotries. And therefore, the only way to eliminate bigotry is to eliminate rational thought. You know, there's a brilliant book out there, and those of you who know it will recognize how heavily informed my opinion is by it. It's called The Closing of the American Mind by Professor Alan Bloom. And Professor Bloom was trying to figure out, I'm going to be blunt, he was a little less blunt, he was trying to figure out in the 80s why his students were suddenly so stupid. And what he came to was the realization, the recognition, that they've been raised to believe that indiscriminateness is a moral imperative, because its opposite is the evil of having discriminated. Right? I paraphrase this in my own works. I say, in order to eliminate discrimination, the modern liberal has opted to become utterly indiscriminate. I'll give you an example. At the airports, in order to not discriminate, we have to intentionally make ourselves stupid. We have to intentionally pretend we don't know some of the things we do know. And we have to pretend that the next person who's likely to blow up an airplane is as much the 87-year-old Swedish great-great-grandmother as those 4 27-year-old imams newly arrived from Syria screaming Allah Akbar just before they board the plane. In order to eliminate discrimination, the modern liberal has opted to become utterly indiscriminate. The problem is, of course, that the ability to discriminate, to thoughtfully choose the better of the available options, as in she's a discriminating shopper, is the essence of rational thought. So quite literally, we are dealing with the whole of Western Europe and today's Democratic Party, dominated as it is by this philosophy, that rejects rational thought as a hate crime. So what you're left with after 10, 12, 14, 20 years in the leftist indoctrination centers that our schools have become are citizens of voting age who, on the one hand, are utterly unwilling and incapable of critically judging the merits of the positions they hold, and have held unquestioned since they're 5 years old. And that is so much the mindset of the modern liberals. It's not that they're not aware of all the things that we're aware of. It's that they need to reject them in order to remain in this 5-year-old utopia that they've been told is the only hope for mankind. A mindless indiscriminateness. So what you're left with is not only adults, citizens of voting age who cannot judge their own positions, but who are virulently antagonistic to any position other than their own. Why? Because when you've been brought up to believe that indiscriminateness is a moral imperative, any position other than their own must have employed discrimination. This is why Bush is Hitler. This is why Reagan is Hitler. This is why Giuliani is Hitler. How's Rudolph Giuliani like Hitler to a thinking person? Well, in one way. Hitler discriminated against the Jews. Rudolph Giuliani discriminated against the crack-addicted prostitutes in Times Square. Hitler discriminated against the Catholics. Giuliani discriminated against the criminal overlords. Right? Hitler discriminated against the gypsies. Giuliani discriminated against the terrorists on 9/11 and beyond. See, any form of discrimination is discrimination. They know that theirs is the position arrived at through the moral imperative of indiscriminateness. Therefore, any position other than their own must have been arrived at through the employment of discrimination. So this makes you not just wrong on your issues and your stances. They don't even think about your issues and your stances. They don't have to. Even if they were willing to, even if they were able to, they don't need to. Would you sit and contemplate Hitler's social security policy? No, you would fight Hitler. So what you're left with is, after 10, 12, 14, 20 years in these indoctrination centers, and it's not a coincidence, the longer you stay in the indoctrination process, the more morally inverted you become. Until, to be head of the ethnic studies department, you have to argue that the Islamic fascist terrorists are the good guys, and the victims of 9/11 were all little Eichmanns. Right? So what you're left with is people who quite literally cannot differentiate between good and evil, right and wrong, better and worse. But here's a key. Indiscriminateness of thought does not lead to indiscriminateness of policy. Indiscriminateness of thought invariably leads the modern liberal, inevitably leads them to side with evil over good, wrong over right, and the behaviors that lead to failure over those that lead to success. Why? Because in a world where you are indiscriminate, where no behavior is to be deemed better or worse than any other, then your expectation is that all behavior should lead to equally good outcomes. When in the real world, different behaviors lead to different outcomes. You and I know why. Because we think. We know why teenage promiscuity in communities that promote promiscuity tend to fail at a greater rate than communities that promote teenage abstinence. Because teenage promiscuity and teenage abstinence are not the same behaviors. Teenage abstinence is a better behavior. Forget the moral component for a moment. Let's just talk practicalities. If your boy's out messing around, he's not home reading a book. If your daughter's down at the abortion mill again, she's not at the library studying for the SATs. If your son's in a hospital bed somewhere dying of AIDS, he's not putting together his 5-year plan. So you and I recognize why those communities that promote teenage abstinence do better than those that promote teenage promiscuity in their music, in their movies, even in the schools. But to the modern liberal who cannot make that judgment, must not make that judgment, that would be discriminating. They have no explanation. So therefore, the only explanation for success has to be that somehow success has cheated. Success, simply by its existence, is proof positive to the modern liberal of some kind of chicanery and likely bigotry. Failure, simply by its existence, no other evidence needed, just the fact that it has failed is enough proof to them that failure has been victimized. So the mindless foot soldier, which is what I call the non-elite, will support the elite's blueprint for utopia, will side with evil over good, wrong over right, and the behaviors that lead to failure over those that lead to success, and have a sense of justice.
So that explains so much to me. I mean, I think I have a pretty good handle on a lot of these issues, but that was just said so concisely, so eloquently. It's just 2 simple steps in understanding it. It is the cult of indiscrimination. No matter what, for fear of being a discriminatory person, you must not discriminate. But of course, the consequence is you can't discriminate between the better of 2 options. So let's apply this to a few social justice warrior issues. Let's start with the fat acceptance movement. You and I can think, to steal Evan's words, it's like, we know that being 300 pounds overweight means that you're going to be unhealthy, you're not going to live as full a life, you're not going to be able to be as good a parent, you're not going to be able to be as good a partner. It's physically less attractive, it's ugly compared to the alternatives of being a healthy weight. But to social justice warriors, you can't discriminate against all of those bad decisions to eat, your body weight in KFC every night. You can't discriminate against that, so you have to delude yourself that you have to pull these people up and elevate them for some reason, despite all their bad choices, and of course pull everybody down who is of healthy weight. They're bad people. They just are not being accepting of people who are obese. That's the kind of disease. Everywhere you look, you have to elevate what is bad and pull down what is good. What's another one? Let's talk about the wage gap and feminism. Now, you and I can say, well, the studies show that women tend to, on a full-time salary job, they work 6 hours less per week than men. Now, it's not even a bad thing. It's not even laziness. They're just dedicating their time, I think, to just other things that are more productive to them, and they're building their skill sets because many of them will want to be a mother in the future, certainly compared to men. Many of them want to be a stay-at-home parent, I should say, compared to men. And so it's a really rational and sensible decision for them. Also, women tend to do not as dirty, dangerous jobs. They don't work in mines as much as working on oil rigs, things like that. So we now understand this. We can identify the reasons that is why women are paid less. We call it the pay gap myth. But feminists can't accept that. You say, well, the employer is discriminating against their choices, but those choices lead them to be a less valuable employee. You and I understand why they can't accept that. They have to it turns out to be deluding themselves because they throw in the tagline. It's not just women aren't paid, they will advertise that women are not paid the same for equal work. Now, the last little parts are a lie. It's true, women are not paid the same, but it's not because of a lack of equal work. It is because they make different decisions and do different types of work for different lengths of time. So, I think just with this two-step formula, just leftism, social justice warriorism, all of it just gets wiped out, and you can explain to people very, very quickly and easily why it doesn't work. So I hope this was really, really enjoyable. I love watching this video. I watched it about a dozen times in the last 2 weeks since I've discovered it, and every time I watch it I get new insights. It's brilliant, and I'll put the link in the description below. Please let me know if you enjoyed it and what you think about some of the ideas he discussed. Did he miss anything? Is there something that can be added? Please let me know in the description below. Give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you soon.